Okay, welcome to session 20, part A. We are now in chapter 13 of the book, but I want to spend 2 sessions on chapter 13. I don't think it's that long and that difficult of a chapter, so even though we're doing two sessions on it, I think they'll be pretty quick sessions. I think. Let's see. The first thing that I want you to learn from this, so it's called measuring the overall impact or the overall performance of economic systems, something like that. Basically, this is the first chapter that's devoted primarily to macroeconomics. Everything we've done before is pretty much all microeconomics. Now, let me explain. If you learn nothing else from this course, I want you all to know the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Econ. Okay. Basically, remember, micro is smaller things, macro is bigger things. So micro basically means within one industry. So topics or problems or aspects that deal just within one industry. So most of these supply and demand curves that we look at, there'll be the demand for some good, not just an industry, it's a particular good within an industry. Or often, I guess, an industry deals with one good, the gasoline industry, for instance. And then the supply, the price, the quantity. We're only looking at one good, and those usually microeconomics. Macroeconomics, so this deals with the overall economy, say, of a country. And it looks at many industries, usually all the industries when it looks at. So things like we're going to talk about gross national product, unemployment. Often we won't talk about as much, at least not in this chapter, but interest rates. So even though you could say that's only within one industry, the banking industry, well, really it affects all the industries. What interest rates are. So definitely unemployment, the overall unemployment in the economy, the overall gross national product. Okay, we all call those macroeconomic questions. Okay, that said, let me give you some of my biases. Not all economists agree with what I'm about to say, but I'm right. Economics is much more developed, has made much more progress in microeconomics than it has in macroeconomics. These questions, even though it's the macroeconomics that usually it makes the news. So trust me, when anyone hears I'm an economist, their first question is, what's GNP going to do, or what's interest rates going to do? And that's not my specialty. And not only that, I think the people who do specialize in that often don't really know what they're talking about. Now, there are lots of smart people. I would say maybe the macroeconomists are even smarter than the microeconomists, but it's just the field has not progressed as much. And I think that it is not as good at predicting things or explaining exactly what's happening as microeconomics is going on. Not only that, let me tell you the extent to which I believe that. So lots of you know about medicine during the 1700s, and a popular way to treat people was through bloodletting. We all know they used leeches. They'd attach leeches to people's skin, and that this is the way to cure an illness. Now, we all know, from the scientific method experiments, that doesn't work. that was just nonsensical folly, bad way to treat patients. Not only that, but in the 1700s, doctors were convinced that it was effective, and they would do things like some patient would get ill, they would do bloodletting from the leeches, and then the patient would die, and then the doctors would conclude, oh, we didn't do enough bloodletting. That's why the patient died. Okay, we look back 250 years from that time and laugh at them. I think the same thing's going to happen with macroeconomics. People are going to look back 250 years from now. They're going to look back at this area and think, what were these guys thinking? Some of these things that these guys believed in macroeconomics is just stupid. Okay. So, given that, I'm going to still teach some of the basics of macroeconomics. We're going to focus mainly on things that I think are true and things that are useful. Okay, so that's the difference between micro and macro. First, let me explain what GNP is, okay, and GDP. So, gross national product, okay, and this is the value in dollars. Okay, so by the way, if you remember back to your chemistry, physics classes in high school, where you often ask, what are the units? Well, the gross national product, the units for the United States, at least, is dollars. Okay, so value in dollars of all products produced by U.S. citizens. Okay, so you could clarify that more, and when there, that definition may not be precise enough for the people in the Commerce Department who are calculating these things every year. For instance, I think if it's a company owned by the U.S., regardless of what percent of its citizens what percentage of its workers are citizens, that it's still called within gross national product. Okay. Now, a related concept is gross domestic product. Okay, and this is value, blah, 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 of all products produced within the U.S. borders. Okay, so if a non-U.S. citizen produces something, say it's a value of $1,000, that will be counted toward, and if that non-citizen produces it, say in Virginia, that product will be counted in gross domestic product, but will not be counted in gross national product. Okay, so it used to be 20 or 30 years ago, you'd always see on the news, and government would emphasize gross national product. For some reason, we emphasize gross domestic product more now, but they're very similar. And let me show you exactly what that means. Okay. So first, let's look at, so this is all products produced by U.S. citizens. Okay, so that is gross national product. Here is all products produced within the U.S. borders. That's GDP. Okay, so notice though that I'd say the vast majority of goods in the U.S., either one that fall within either of these categories, fall within both. It's in the intersection. Okay, but there's some goods, like I said, if you're a non-U.S. citizen, but you produce the good in Virginia, say, then you're going to be in this green area. Okay, produced, and then meanwhile, if you're a U.S. citizen, but you produce the good in, say, England, then it's going to be in this red area. Okay. Now it happens that not that big a distinction because in the U.S. currently, the red area is about equal to the size of the green area. So, whichever you use, because of that, GNP and GDP are almost exactly the same in any given year. Okay, and definitely if you look at changes, so in economics and in math, often we use the capital Greek letter delta. So delta GNP, the change or the change in GNP. So by the way, so it's now late October. You're probably watching this early November 2020. It's just about to be the presidential election. In fact, a lot of political scientists have noted that this factor, the change in GNP, and especially the third quarter of an election year, that is just absolutely critical. That factor helps predict probably better than anything whether the incumbent is going to win or not. And when they say change in GNP, what they usually mean is the percentage change in GNP, and that's usually something like 2 or 3%. And it looks like the magic number is something like in the high twos or about 3%. That if the incumbent reaches that level in the third quarter, he wins. If not, he or could be she loses. Okay, so we talk about the change in GNP. Okay, percentage terms. Then often we'll talk about the change in GDP. Okay, and those two numbers are always almost exactly the same. If one's 2.9, the other's, if not 2.9, 2.8 or 3.0. So it doesn't matter that much what you use. This happens by convention. We have started using GDP more. Okay. Now, next thing I want you to understand about this chapter, the chapter gets into some kind of fine details about how these things are calculated. I don't want you to get too hung up on that. I just want you to know that. For one thing, I don't know them. A lot of these things I had to look up, and not only that, most economists don't know them. It's only the people who are actually working in the Commerce Department who are calculating these things, who know a lot of the intricate details that were discussed in the book. But the key thing I want you to know is this big one, the difference between GNP versus GDP. Okay, that kind of broad definition, whether it's in the U.S. borders or U.S. citizens, that's the key thing I want you to know. Okay. I'll give a little more details when I get some of these other definitions. Okay, so that's the broad definition of GNP and GDP. I want to give some more details about exactly how it's calculated, especially you need to look at finished goods or added value, and it turns out usually they're the same thing. But that will be in the next part. That'll be in part B. So that is part B. That is part A. I'll see you in part B.